Reddit stories. Family drama unleashed when my sister found out about my $12 million fortune. Welcome to Silent Wars, where we share the most intriguing Reddit stories that will captivate you from start to finish. Today's story is one filled with unexpected twists and powerful life lessons. If you love true stories, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing content. We promise to keep you entertained and inspired with each new story. The Pain of Favoritism, a story of resilience and independence. Family is often considered the cornerstone of our emotional support system, a place where we seek comfort, love, and encouragement. However, for some, family dynamics are anything but supportive. Growing up, Sarah's life was marked by a profound sense of neglect, despite her exceptional accomplishments. She lived in a household where one sibling could do no wrong while the other, like Sarah, was often invisible, treated as a secondary presence. Her story reflects the lasting emotional toll of favoritism, how it shapes one's identity, and the journey to finding peace and success despite it. Sarah, now 38, recalls her childhood as a typical, though not overly affectionate, upbringing. Her parents, while not overtly neglectful, were not warm either. She was raised in an environment where achievements were expected, but never celebrated. Sarah's mother, who would sometimes help with her homework, and her father, who occasionally took her fishing, did not express the kind of emotional support she needed to thrive. But it wasn't until the arrival of her younger sister, Rachel, that Sarah's experience of neglect began to feel more like an enduring wound that would take years to heal. When Rachel was born, things changed dramatically in Sarah's household. Sarah remembers how her Aunt Kelly came to pick her up in the middle of the night, telling her to pack a suitcase because her mother was in the hospital. Her sister's premature birth marked the beginning of a new reality, one that excluded Sarah from her own family. While Rachel spent the first few years of her life in and out of hospitals, Sarah was left to fend for herself emotionally. Her parents, particularly her mother, became obsessed with Rachel's health and safety, creating an atmosphere of fear and constant disaffection that kept Sarah at arm's length. As Rachel grew older, she didn't just benefit from the attention of her parents. She learned to manipulate the system to her advantage, often pretending to be ill to avoid responsibilities, which only added to the distance between Sarah and her family. Sarah, on the other hand, did everything she could to earn her parents' approval, excelling in school and participating in various activities. But no matter how hard she tried, she was always overlooked. Awards and achievements seemed to have no impact on her parents, who barely acknowledged her accomplishments. It wasn't just the lack of attention that hurt, it was the way the family would justify their actions. Sarah's parents would tell her that Rachel needed more attention because she had a rough start in life, while Sarah was independent and could fend for herself. This idea was ingrained in Sarah's mind, that her health, her resilience, and her achievements made her less worthy of love and support. Sarah's childhood was spent trying to prove that she wasn't the failure her parents believed her to be, yet she remained invisible in their eyes. By the time Sarah reached high school, she had grown used to being ignored and dismissed. Yet she found solace in her academic success. It was here that she truly found her voice, especially when she joined the debate team. Debate not only helped her develop a sense of self-worth, but it also taught her valuable life skills, including how to negotiate and how to be confident in her arguments. Sarah was becoming a force to be reckoned with, even though her family remained oblivious to her transformation. During high school, Sarah achieved a perfect SAT score, a feat that less than 1% of students accomplish. But when she shared the news with her parents, her mother, distracted by Rachel's homework, barely acknowledged her achievement. Instead, Sarah was told to keep quiet because Rachel needed her space. This moment, where her greatest accomplishment was met with indifference, was a defining point in Sarah's life. It made her realize that no matter what she did, she would never receive the recognition she deserved from her family. Sarah's journey to college was similarly unsupportive. Despite being accepted to prestigious universities like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, Sarah's parents remained focused on Rachel, who, despite being an average student, received all the attention. Sarah's triumphs were never celebrated in the way Rachel's minor achievements were. Sarah had to navigate the entire college application process on her own, writing her own essays, gathering recommendations, and filling out financial paperwork. Her parents, too preoccupied with Rachel's extracurricular activities, showed little interest in helping her pursue her dreams. Sarah's college years marked the beginning of a new chapter. She worked tirelessly to support herself, taking double shifts at a diner to save money for tuition. Her grandmother, Marie, became her anchor, offering not only financial support, but also the emotional encouragement Sarah had never received from her parents. It was Grandma Marie who inspired Sarah's lifelong interest in vintage jewelry, a passion that would ultimately become her career. As Sarah settled into her college dorm, she promised herself that she would build a life so successful that being overlooked by her family would never be an issue again. After graduating from the University of Michigan, Sarah secured a job at a high-end auction house in Detroit, specializing in antique jewelry. It was at this job that Sarah's true potential began to shine. Her attention to detail, honed over years of organizing her grandmother's jewelry collection, proved invaluable. Sarah was quickly recognized for her expertise and began uncovering valuable pieces that others had overlooked. One of her first major discoveries was a rare Art Deco brooch, which later sold for $47,000 at auction. This success caught the attention of her boss, who encouraged her to start her own jewelry authentication business. Sarah, though initially hesitant, took the leap. She invested all of her savings, borrowed against her car, and rented a small office above a Chinese restaurant. The first few months were a struggle, but her reputation for discovering valuable pieces quickly spread. As her business grew, Sarah moved to a larger office and hired a team of specialists. Her company became one of the leading jewelry authentication firms in the country, and Sarah's career reached new heights. However, her success came with its own set of challenges. Sarah had to continue playing the role of the modest antique shop worker when she visited her family on Sundays, as they remained unaware of her wealth. Her mother would continue to introduce her to others as the girl who works with old jewelry, while Rachel, now in a dead-end marketing job, would sarcastically comment on Sarah's career. Despite the immense wealth and success Sarah had built for herself, her family still treated her as if she were inferior. The tipping point came during Thanksgiving. Sarah, having successfully built a multi-million-dollar business, decided to take charge of the holiday meal and had it catered. When Rachel discovered Sarah's financial success, she demanded a share of the wealth. The family, instead of celebrating Sarah's success, reacted with anger and entitlement. Sarah, who had been financially supporting her family for years through anonymous transfers, was accused of being selfish for not giving them more. In that moment, everything Sarah had been holding back poured out. Years of being overlooked, of being dismissed as the invisible child, came rushing to the surface. She confronted her family, pointing out the years of neglect, the missed achievements, and the constant comparisons. Her family, instead of feeling proud of her accomplishments, continued to demand more. Sarah, finally liberated from the emotional chains that had bound her for so long, walked out of her family's life. She canceled all financial support and severed ties with them once and for all. The aftermath was a whirlwind of guilt-tripping and harassment, but Sarah stood firm. She had learned to live authentically, free from the expectations and demands of a family that had never truly supported her. Now, years later, Sarah has found peace. Her business continues to thrive, and she is living a life on her own terms. She no longer feels the need to prove herself to anyone. As for her family, they have moved on, but Sarah knows that the real victory is in her independence, in building a life that is hers and hers alone. She is no longer the invisible child, but a successful woman who has created her own story. A story of family betrayal, self-discovery, and triumph. Family dynamics can be both a source of love and security, but they can also be complex and at times toxic. For Sarah, her experience with her family was filled with favoritism, emotional neglect, and a constant struggle to gain the recognition and support she deserved. Growing up, Sarah was often made to feel like she was invisible, always overshadowed by her younger sister, Rachel, who received preferential treatment due to her early health struggles. But as Sarah grew older, she would discover her own strength and resilience, ultimately building a life for herself that would defy the expectations and limitations imposed upon her by her family. This is a story of self-discovery, betrayal, and the pursuit of independence, one that highlights the emotional toll of favoritism and the journey to reclaim one's own life. Sarah's childhood was, in many ways, a quiet struggle for attention. Her parents were not outwardly neglectful, but they were emotionally distant, and their attention was often fixated on Rachel, who was born prematurely and faced a series of health challenges in her early years. Sarah's mother, obsessed with ensuring Rachel's safety and health, created an atmosphere of fear and cleanliness in the home. While Sarah's parents were focused on Rachel's needs, Sarah was left to her own devices. Every time she showed the slightest sign of illness, she was sent away to her grandmother's or aunt's house, as though her very presence was a threat to her sister's fragile health. This behavior quickly became apparent to Sarah. She wasn't being sent away on adventures. She was being handled as if she could somehow harm Rachel. The message was clear. Sarah was not as important as Rachel. No matter how hard she tried to prove herself, getting straight A's, winning science fairs, and excelling in school, nothing seemed to garner her the attention or approval she craved from her parents. The constant comparisons between her and Rachel only deepened Sarah's sense of invisibility. At the age of 12, Sarah had been practicing for the school talent show, eagerly preparing to perform Bridge Over Troubled Water on the piano. But when the night of the show arrived, Sarah's parents didn't show up to support her. Instead, they attended Rachel's flute recital just 2 weeks later, despite Rachel's performance being far less impressive. This moment was a painful turning point for Sarah. It was not just that her family ignored her accomplishments, it was that they actively celebrated Rachel's mediocrity. It was as though Rachel's every move was deserving of praise, while Sarah's efforts were dismissed. As the years went on, Sarah tried to find solace in her own interests, particularly in organizing her grandmother's extensive jewelry collection. This hobby sparked a passion in her for vintage jewelry, a passion that would eventually shape her future. But even as Sarah poured herself into her studies and developed her skills, her family continued to downplay her achievements, insisting that Rachel needed more attention because of her health problems. Sarah, on the other hand, was considered strong and independent, traits that, ironically, meant she would receive less love and support. By high school, Sarah had mastered the art of self-sufficiency. While Rachel dominated the family's attention, Sarah excelled in academics and extracurricular activities. She joined the debate team, became president of the National Honor Society, and was editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. But no matter how much she achieved, her parents remained uninvolved. When Sarah earned a perfect SAT score, an achievement that less than 1% of students accomplish, her parents barely reacted. Her mother, distracted by helping Rachel with homework, didn't even congratulate her. Instead, Sarah was told to keep it quiet because Rachel was studying for an important test. Sarah's journey through high school was one of quiet rebellion. While Rachel was allowed to coast through life with little responsibility, Sarah was constantly driven to prove herself. She worked part-time at Carson's Diner to save for her college education, as her parents were too preoccupied with Rachel's activities to help her with any of the financial paperwork. Sarah applied to 15 colleges on her own, handling all the essays, recommendations, and financial aid forms by herself. Despite receiving acceptance letters from prestigious schools like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, her parents remained focused on Rachel, who was busy with cheerleading and soccer. Sarah's sense of being overlooked only intensified when it came time to discuss college finances. Her parents, who had no interest in helping her with applications or financial aid, were suddenly concerned about the cost of Rachel's cheerleading competitions. When Sarah was awarded a full scholarship to the University of Michigan, her parents' reaction was less than enthusiastic. They were more concerned about Rachel's upcoming activities than they were about Sarah's monumental achievement. But despite the lack of support from her family, Sarah moved forward. She graduated from the University of Michigan with honors and quickly landed a job at a prestigious auction house in Detroit, working with high-end antiques and jewelry. It was here that Sarah truly began to shine. Drawing on her childhood interest in vintage jewelry, she started identifying rare and valuable pieces that others had overlooked. One of her first significant discoveries was a rare Art Deco brooch, which sold for $47,000 at auction. This success marked the beginning of Sarah's rise to prominence in the jewelry world. Despite her growing success, Sarah's family remained uninterested. During Sunday dinners, her mother would still refer to her as the girl who works with old jewelry, dismissing her career achievements. Rachel, on the other hand, would make sarcastic comments about Sarah's job, claiming it was beneath her. Even as Sarah was achieving great success, her family refused to acknowledge her accomplishments. But Sarah had learned to rely on herself, and she no longer sought validation from them. The turning point in Sarah's story came when her boss encouraged her to start her own jewelry authentication business. Sarah, despite her doubts, took the leap, investing all of her savings and taking out a loan against her car to fund the venture. She rented a small office above a Chinese restaurant, and with a focus on detail and a passion for her work, she quickly gained a reputation for uncovering valuable pieces. Her business grew rapidly, and she soon expanded to multiple locations in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. Despite her newfound success, Sarah continued to play the role of the modest antique shop worker when visiting her family. She remained silent during family dinners, while Rachel boasted about her latest shopping sprees and made sarcastic remarks about Sarah's career. Sarah's success was not celebrated. Instead, it was downplayed and dismissed. The situation reached a boiling point at Thanksgiving. Sarah, tired of pretending that everything was fine, decided to cater the family's Thanksgiving dinner. When Rachel discovered that Sarah had built a multi-million-dollar business, she demanded a share of the wealth. Her family, instead of expressing pride, reacted with anger and entitlement. Sarah was accused of being selfish for not giving them more money, despite the fact that she had been financially supporting them for years. In that moment, Sarah had had enough. Years of being overlooked, of being dismissed, and of constantly having her achievements minimized came flooding to the surface. She confronted her family, pointing out the years of neglect, the missed milestones, and the constant comparisons. Instead of supporting her success, they were angry that she hadn't shared more of her wealth with them. Sarah walked out of the family's life that day, cutting off all financial support and severing ties once and for all. The aftermath was a whirlwind of guilt-tripping and harassment, but Sarah stood firm. She had finally taken control of her own life and refused to let her family's toxic behavior define her. The years of emotional neglect and favoritism had taught her to be self-sufficient, but now she was ready to live authentically, free from the expectations of a family that had never truly supported her. In the months that followed, Sarah's life continued to improve. Her business flourished, and she found peace in knowing that she had built a life that was truly her own. Her family, now realizing that their demands for money were never going to be met, stopped trying to contact her. Sarah had finally found the freedom she had been searching for, and she was no longer bound by the toxic relationships that had defined her early life. Sarah's story is one of resilience, independence, and triumph. It is a reminder that no matter how difficult life may be, we have the power to create our own paths and build lives that reflect our true worth. Her success is not just a reflection of her professional achievements, but also a testament to her emotional strength and determination to overcome the obstacles her family placed in her way. A tale of family favoritism, betrayal, and personal empowerment. Family is often considered the foundation of support and unconditional love. For many people, it is a source of comfort and a pillar of emotional security throughout their lives. However, for some, family dynamics can be marked by favoritism, neglect, and deep emotional wounds. This was the harsh reality that Sarah experienced, as she navigated a life overshadowed by her younger sister, Rachel, and a family that constantly dismissed her achievements. From an early age, Sarah was made to feel invisible, relegated to the background, while Rachel, the golden child, was lavished with attention and care. What started as a childhood marked by neglect would ultimately lead Sarah down a path of self-discovery, empowerment, and a triumph over a family that failed to recognize her worth. This is Sarah's story, a journey of resilience, betrayal, and the ultimate liberation from toxic family expectations. Sarah's childhood began like any other, but it soon became clear that her family's dynamic was anything but ordinary. At 8 years old, Sarah had been an only child, and while her parents weren't overtly neglectful, they were emotionally distant. Her mother, Irene, was absorbed in her work and her husband's projects, and her father, Banks, was emotionally unavailable. Sarah's experience of family life was marked by indifference rather than affection. She vividly remembers moments when her mother would help her with her homework, and her father would occasionally take her fishing on Lake St. Clair, but these were sporadic moments of connection that left her feeling more isolated than loved. The birth of her younger sister, Rachel, was the pivotal moment that changed everything. Rachel was born prematurely and faced a range of health challenges early in her life, leading Sarah's parents to become consumed with Rachel's well-being. Sarah recalls that soon after Rachel's birth, her home transformed into a sterile bubble, with constant disinfecting and the installation of hand sanitizer stations in every room. Sarah's role in the family became clearer over time. She was the healthy child, the one who didn't need attention or special care. She quickly learned that her existence was secondary to Rachel's, and any sign of illness would send her off to her grandmother or aunt's house, where she would be shielded from the threat of being around her sickly sister. At first, Sarah took the separation from her family as an adventure. She enjoyed her time at Grandma Marie's, who would make cookies, and at Aunt Kelly's, who had an extensive collection of Nancy Drew books. But as she grew older, Sarah began to understand the true nature of her family's actions. It wasn't about giving her a break or sending her away for a change of scenery. It was about keeping her out of the way, as if she were an inconvenience. Every time she showed the slightest symptom of illness, she was whisked away, out of sight and out of mind. Her parents were too focused on Rachel to even notice her needs, and this neglect soon morphed into a deep feeling of invisibility. No matter how hard Sarah tried to gain their attention through perfect grades, accolades, or accomplishments, it was never enough. It was as though she didn't matter unless Rachel's needs were met first. Sarah's internalized sense of invisibility only deepened as she entered her teenage years. Her efforts to be seen, to be noticed by her parents, were consistently ignored. In high school, she excelled in every academic and extracurricular activity. She joined the debate team, became the National Honor Society president, and even earned a perfect SAT score. Yet, despite these accomplishments, her parents remained uninvolved. When Sarah received her perfect SAT score, her mother barely acknowledged it, as she was too busy helping Rachel with her homework. In fact, her mother's reaction was so lackluster that it pushed Sarah to question her own self-worth. But Sarah's story is not one of resignation. Despite the lack of recognition and love from her family, she found a way to carve out her own path. She threw herself into her studies, focused on building a future independent of the family that had never given her the support she needed. Sarah's passion for vintage jewelry, which began during her childhood when she spent time organizing her grandmother's collection, became the driving force behind her career. She sought out scholarships to prestigious universities, applying to 15 schools on her own, writing her own essays, and gathering her own recommendations. When Sarah was accepted into Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, she knew that her future was her own to shape, but her family's reactions were far from celebratory. Instead of being proud, her family continued to focus on Rachel, who was struggling to find direction in her own life. Sarah's acceptance into the University of Michigan, where she received a full scholarship, was met with indifference, and her parents expressed more concern over Rachel's cheerleading activities than Sarah's academic achievements. But Sarah, undeterred by her family's neglect, moved forward with her plans. She worked hard to save money and, with the help of her grandmother, set herself up for success. It was her grandmother's unwavering belief in her potential that gave Sarah the strength to pursue her dreams. College was a whirlwind of challenges, independence, and growth. While Sarah thrived academically, earning top honors, her parents remained preoccupied with Rachel's continuing struggles. They failed to see the woman Sarah was becoming, choosing instead to focus on Rachel's lack of direction and academic difficulties. But Sarah didn't let her family's lack of acknowledgement deter her. She graduated with honors and, after college, secured a job at a prestigious auction house in Detroit, where she began working with high-end antiques and vintage jewelry. It was there that Sarah truly discovered her passion for authentication, and her talents were quickly recognized. She made her first big breakthrough when she identified a rare Art Deco brooch that was misidentified as costume jewelry. The brooch was sold for $47,000 at auction, and Sarah's expertise was solidified. Despite her growing success, Sarah's family continued to treat her as if she was invisible. At Sunday dinners, they would still refer to her as the girl who works with old jewelry, dismissing her accomplishments while lavishing praise on Rachel for her minor achievements. Sarah's frustration with her family's lack of recognition only deepened. She had spent her entire life working to prove her worth, and yet nothing she did seemed to matter. In private, Sarah began to realize that she no longer needed her family's approval. She had built her own life, one that was independent of their toxic expectations. When Sarah's boss at the auction house suggested she start her own jewelry authentication business, she initially hesitated. But as the idea took root, Sarah took a leap of faith, using her savings and taking out a loan to fund the venture. She rented a small office in a less-than-ideal location above a Chinese restaurant, but she was determined to make it work. The first few months were difficult, and there were times when Sarah wasn't sure how she would make ends meet. But as word spread about her talents, her business began to grow. She expanded to multiple locations in Detroit, Chicago, and New York, and soon became one of the top experts in her field. As Sarah's business flourished, she kept her success a secret from her family. They still believed she worked at an antique shop, unaware that she was building a multi-million-dollar business. Sarah played the role of the modest antique worker during family dinners, listening to Rachel brag about her latest trivial accomplishments, while secretly knowing that she had achieved more in 1 year than Rachel had in her entire life. Sarah's success became her personal victory, a triumph over the years of neglect and favoritism she had endured. The tipping point came on Thanksgiving, when Sarah decided to cater the family dinner. Her mother, who had never been able to cook, was overwhelmed by the idea of preparing a large meal. Sarah, who had been financially supporting her family for years, offered to cover the cost of catering. But when Rachel saw the figures on Sarah's laptop, the truth about her wealth came crashing down. The family's reaction was not one of pride or excitement. Instead, they were furious that Sarah had kept her success a secret. Rachel, in particular, was outraged, demanding that Sarah share her wealth with the family. Sarah's years of resentment came pouring out, and she confronted her parents about their neglect and the years they had spent focusing on Rachel while dismissing her accomplishments. In that moment, Sarah walked away from her family for good. She canceled the financial support she had been providing them and cut ties with the people who had never truly seen her for who she was. The aftermath was filled with harassment, guilt-tripping, and social media rants, but Sarah stood firm. She had finally liberated herself from the emotional prison her family had built around her, and she was free to live life on her own terms. Her business continued to grow, and Sarah finally felt the freedom and peace she had longed for. Her family, now realizing they could no longer manipulate her, stopped trying to contact her. Sarah's story is one of perseverance, self-discovery, and triumph. It's a testament to the power of self-reliance and the importance of standing up for oneself in the face of adversity. Through it all, Sarah found the strength to build her own life, separate from the toxic expectations of her family. In doing so, she not only proved her worth to herself but also showed the world that success is not defined by the approval of others, but by the strength to create your own path. A story of betrayal, family entitlement, and the power of self-discovery. Family relationships are often considered the most sacred bonds in our lives. They are supposed to offer us unconditional love, support, and a sense of belonging. But for some, family dynamics can be marked by favoritism, neglect, and deep emotional scars. For Sarah, her relationship with her family was defined by being the overlooked child, the one whose achievements were always downplayed in favor of her younger sister, Rachel, the golden child. As Sarah struggled for recognition, she was constantly made to feel invisible, while Rachel's every move seemed to be celebrated. What followed was a painful journey of self-discovery, betrayal, and ultimately liberation. Sarah's story is a profound reflection on how toxic family dynamics can shape our lives, but also how we can break free from those patterns to build a future on our own terms. Sarah's story begins in a way that many people can relate to: a typical childhood filled with ups and downs. However, her experience took a turn when she was 8 years old and her family dynamics began to shift with the birth of her sister, Rachel. Prior to that, Sarah had been an only child and received a reasonable amount of attention from her parents. Her mother, Irene, was not overly affectionate, but she would help Sarah with her homework, while her father, Banks, would occasionally take her fishing on Lake St. Clair. It wasn't the picture-perfect family, but it was enough for Sarah. Or so she thought. When Rachel was born prematurely and faced health complications, Sarah's life would never be the same. The arrival of Rachel changed the entire atmosphere in the household. Sarah's mother became consumed with Rachel's health issues, and soon their home was turned into a sterile environment. Irene was obsessed with cleanliness, setting up hand sanitizers in every room and frequently disinfecting the house. The harsh odor of bleach filled the air, a smell that would later trigger distress for Sarah as a reminder of the emotional distance she would come to feel. As Rachel's health improved, Sarah became increasingly sidelined. Whenever Sarah even slightly showed signs of illness, She was whisked away to either her grandmother's or aunt's house. At first, Sarah thought it was a fun adventure, a break from her everyday life, but as time passed, she realized that she wasn't being sent away for her well-being. She was being sent away because her existence was perceived as a threat to Rachel's fragile health. No matter how hard Sarah tried to earn her parents' attention, it was always Rachel who seemed to be the center of focus. A mild cold would send Sarah to her aunt's house, while Rachel's health issues were treated with much more urgency. This favoritism became a pattern that would persist for years. By the time Sarah reached high school, she had learned that no matter what she accomplished, it would never be enough to gain the kind of recognition that Rachel seemed to effortlessly receive. Sarah excelled in school, winning first prizes in science fairs, joining numerous extracurricular activities, and even earning a perfect SAT score. But instead of congratulating her, her parents barely acknowledged her achievements. When she showed her mother her perfect SAT score, Irene's response was minimal at best. She was too busy helping Rachel with her homework. Rachel's accomplishments, no matter how minor, were always met with celebrations, while Sarah was left to fend for herself emotionally. In fact, when Sarah won a scientific award for renewable energy in high school, her father barely paid attention and asked only to store the display board in the garage because Rachel had a cardboard allergy. It was a direct reflection of how Sarah's accomplishments were consistently minimized. What hurt Sarah even more was the way her parents rewrote history to justify their actions. Sarah's success was chalked up to the fact that she was independent and didn't need as much attention. On the other hand, Rachel's health struggles were seen as a constant reason for everyone to rally around her. Sarah's parents would say things like, "Rachel needs more attention because she had a rough start," while Sarah's efforts to gain attention were always dismissed as unnecessary. It was a deeply painful experience for Sarah, as she realized that her entire existence was treated as less important than her sister's, even though she had done nothing to deserve such treatment. Despite being emotionally ignored and neglected by her family, Sarah found an outlet in the form of her grandmother, Grandma Marie, who sparked her interest in vintage jewelry. Grandma's collection of costume jewelry became a sanctuary for Sarah, and she spent hours organizing and cataloging the pieces. This interest in vintage jewelry would later become a pivotal part of Sarah's life. Unlike her parents, Grandma showed Sarah genuine interest and validation, a stark contrast to the indifference Sarah felt at home. As Sarah grew older, the sense of being overlooked only deepened. When she entered college, she did so on her own terms, applying to multiple schools and earning scholarships without any help from her parents. They were too preoccupied with Rachel's own struggles to even acknowledge Sarah's achievements. It wasn't until Sarah received her full-ride scholarship to the University of Michigan that she felt a sense of relief. But even then, her parents' response was lackluster. They were more concerned about Rachel's cheerleading competitions and her future rather than celebrating Sarah's academic success. Despite the lack of support from her family, Sarah's drive and ambition only grew. She worked hard to make the most of her time in college, determined to create a life for herself that was independent of her family's toxic expectations. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of loneliness and frustration, but Sarah was determined to succeed. After college, Sarah landed a job at an auction house where she began working with high-end antiques and vintage jewelry. It was there that she found her true calling, authenticating valuable pieces of jewelry. Her attention to detail and passion for the subject allowed her to quickly rise through the ranks. Sarah's breakthrough came when she authenticated a rare Art Deco brooch that had been misidentified as costume jewelry. The piece was sold for $47,000 at auction, and Sarah's talents as an expert in vintage jewelry authentication were officially recognized. Despite her success, Sarah continued to keep her achievements a secret from her family. They still believed she worked at a small antique shop, unaware that she was building a multi-million-dollar business. Sarah played the role of the humble antique worker during family dinners, listening to Rachel's constant bragging about her minor accomplishments. Sarah's success was something she kept to herself, and the irony of her family's ignorance became a source of quiet satisfaction. However, everything changed on Thanksgiving. Sarah, who had been supporting her family financially for years, decided to cater the Thanksgiving dinner instead of allowing her mother to struggle with cooking. When Rachel saw Sarah's laptop screen displaying her financial details, everything came crashing down. Sarah had been hiding her wealth for years, but now her family saw the truth. She had built a fortune for herself. Instead of congratulating her, however, her family responded with anger and entitlement. Rachel demanded that Sarah give her money, and her parents chastised her for not helping more. The years of being ignored, overlooked, and mistreated by her family came flooding out in a confrontation that Sarah had been holding back for years. In that moment, Sarah made the bold decision to walk away from her family. She canceled the monthly financial transfers she had been making to them, and when they refused to leave her office, she had to call security. The months that followed were filled with harassment, guilt-tripping, and social media posts from Rachel claiming that Sarah had hoarded wealth while her family struggled. But Sarah, who had spent her entire life trying to win her family's approval, finally realized that she didn't need them to define her worth. In the end, Sarah's decision to sever ties with her family was an act of liberation. She had spent years being ignored and undervalued by the very people who should have supported her. But by walking away, Sarah reclaimed her power. She stopped financing the life her family wanted for her, and began living on her own terms. Her business flourished and Sarah finally found peace. For the first time in her life, she felt truly liberated from the toxic expectations of her family. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of self-worth and independence. It is a story of resilience, of overcoming betrayal, and of building a life that is truly one's own. In a world where family dynamics can sometimes be toxic and suffocating, Sarah's journey proves that it's possible to break free and create something meaningful and fulfilling, even when others don't see your worth. The Price of Family Expectations. A journey of self-discovery and liberation. Family is often considered the cornerstone of support, comfort, and unconditional love. However, for some, family relationships can be deeply complicated, marked by favoritism, entitlement, and emotional neglect. This is the story of Sarah, a woman who spent her life overshadowed by her younger sister Rachel, the golden child who always seemed to be the center of attention. Despite Sarah's immense achievements and hard work, her family's lack of recognition and constant belittling shaped a painful narrative of invisibility and emotional betrayal. It wasn't until Sarah learned the hard truth about her family's motives that she was able to break free from their toxic grip and build a life she could call her own, one that was shaped by her own terms and values. A family defined by favoritism. Sarah's story began with a sense of normalcy. Growing up, she was an only child who received the attention of her parents, albeit not in an affectionate or nurturing manner. Her mother Irene was distant and focused primarily on her younger sister Rachel's medical needs, while her father Banks was emotionally absent and often critical. Sarah spent much of her early life feeling unseen but managing to find solace in her academic achievements and extracurricular activities. Everything changed when Sarah was 8 years old, and her younger sister Rachel was born prematurely. The arrival of Rachel, with her health complications, altered the dynamics of the family forever. Irene became consumed by Rachel's health needs, and Sarah's world began to shrink as she was continually sidelined in favor of her sister. The house transformed into a sterile environment, with constant cleaning and disinfecting. Sarah was often sent away to her grandmother's or aunt's house if she even slightly showed signs of illness. What began as fun trips to visit family members turned into a pattern of emotional neglect. Sarah's health was treated as a threat to Rachel's well-being. As Rachel grew older, her health problems lessened, but her place as the golden child in the family was firmly established. Sarah, on the other hand, became more and more invisible. Her academic successes and achievements, which would have been celebrated in any other family, went unnoticed. Sarah earned perfect grades, took first place in science fairs, and even received a perfect SAT score. Yet, when she showed her mother her SAT results, Irene's response was lukewarm at best, as she was too busy tending to Rachel's needs. The emotional neglect Sarah experienced from her parents became more pronounced as she reached her teenage years. Rachel's minor accomplishments were praised, while Sarah's significant milestones were brushed aside. The weight of unacknowledged success. Despite her family's disregard for her, Sarah never stopped striving for success. In high school, she immersed herself in her studies, joined clubs, and worked part-time at a local diner. But it wasn't just about academic achievements. Sarah's time spent organizing her grandmother's vintage jewelry collection sparked a deep interest in antiques. This hobby became her escape from the emotional neglect she felt at home. Her grandmother, Marie, offered the only genuine encouragement Sarah had ever received, which fueled her passion for antiques and eventually led her to a career in jewelry authentication. As Sarah navigated through high school, she found that her hard work and determination gave her the opportunity to escape the oppressive family dynamic. But her success only highlighted the stark contrast between her and Rachel. While Sarah focused on her future and worked tirelessly to build a life of independence, Rachel continued to play the role of the family's beloved but underachieving child. Despite her own shortcomings, Rachel was still the one who garnered all the attention and sympathy. Sarah, in turn, became more self-sufficient and learned to be her own cheerleader. With no one to validate her accomplishments, Sarah developed an inner resilience that would serve her well in the years to come. College. A break from the past. When Sarah went off to college, she left her family behind, determined to forge a new path. Her parents, though proud of her academic achievements, were too preoccupied with Rachel's own life to truly support Sarah. They seemed more concerned about Rachel's cheerleading competitions and social life than Sarah's future. But despite their lack of support, Sarah excelled in college, earning a full scholarship to the University of Michigan. But even this monumental achievement was met with indifference from her family. Instead of celebrating her success, her parents expressed concerns about Rachel's need for attention and her own struggles in school. The lack of recognition for her hard work didn't deter Sarah. She had spent years learning to thrive on her own, without any external validation, and that drive continued into her college years. Sarah's time at the University of Michigan was marked by independence, self-reliance, and a growing sense of purpose. She worked multiple jobs, including a position at an auction house, where she gained invaluable experience in antique authentication. As she honed her skills and built her reputation, Sarah realized that she was capable of achieving something extraordinary. It wasn't just about excelling in her studies, it was about creating a life for herself that would no longer be defined by her family's expectations. A breakthrough in jewelry authentication. After college, Sarah landed a job at a high-end auction house, where her skills in jewelry authentication were quickly recognized. She became known for her ability to spot valuable items that others missed, a skill she had honed during her years spent organizing her grandmother's jewelry collection. One day, Sarah discovered a rare Art Deco brooch that had been misidentified as costume jewelry. Her discovery led to a $47,000 sale at auction, cementing her reputation as a rising star in the industry. This breakthrough allowed her to gain the confidence she needed to step into the world of freelance authentication. Sarah's journey was far from easy. She started her own business from the ground up, taking out loans and using her savings to rent a small office space in a less-than-ideal location. But she didn't mind. She was determined to make it work, no matter how difficult the journey. Over the next few years, her business grew rapidly as she earned a reputation for her attention to detail and commitment to excellence. Her success in the jewelry authentication world was undeniable, but her family continued to live in denial about her achievements. They still believed she worked at a small antique shop, unaware that she had built a multi-million-dollar business. The Thanksgiving reveal. A family's entitlement. The breaking point came on Thanksgiving. Sarah, who had been supporting her family financially for years, decided to cater the Thanksgiving dinner rather than allow her mother to struggle with cooking. She had grown tired of pretending to be the unimportant daughter, especially when she had worked so hard to achieve everything she had. But when Rachel saw Sarah's laptop open, displaying her business transactions and bank account balances, everything changed. The truth came crashing down. Sarah's family, instead of congratulating her for her success, reacted with anger and entitlement. They demanded that she give them more money, claiming that they had been struggling for years. Rachel, who had always been coddled by their parents, sobbed about how she deserved a share of Sarah's wealth. Sarah, who had spent years being treated as invisible, finally stood up for herself. She reminded her parents of all the times they had ignored her accomplishments and prioritized Rachel's needs over hers. The confrontation was a turning point for Sarah, as she realized that no amount of money could ever buy her family's respect or love. A decision to walk away. After the Thanksgiving disaster, Sarah made the difficult decision to cut ties with her family. She canceled the monthly financial transfers she had been making to them and stopped engaging with their demands. The family responded with anger, and even resorted to harassing Sarah through social media and phone calls. But Sarah, now empowered by the truth of her own worth, refused to go back to the role of the family's financial provider. Sarah's decision to walk away from her family was an act of self-liberation. For the first time in her life, she felt free from the toxic expectations that had plagued her for years. She had spent her entire life trying to prove herself to a family that would never see her for who she truly was. But now she was free to create a future that was hers alone. She continued to grow her business, expanding it into new cities, and living a life that was finally defined by her own terms. The power of liberation. Sarah's story is one of resilience, strength, and self-discovery. It's a reminder that our worth is not determined by the expectations or judgments of others, especially when those people have never truly seen us. For Sarah, it took years of emotional neglect, betrayal, and family entitlement to finally realize that she didn't owe anyone her happiness or success. In the end, she learned that the most powerful form of liberation is not seeking revenge, but simply living a life that is authentically your own. Through her journey, Sarah discovered that it was possible to break free from the toxic patterns of family dynamics and create a future filled with empowerment, peace, and fulfillment. She built a life based on her own terms, one that was shaped by her hard work, determination, and a refusal to be defined by the limitations others tried to place on her. For anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own family, Sarah's story offers a message of hope. You are worthy, you are capable, and you can create a future that is truly your own. The struggles of family favoritism and finding empowerment through self-reliance. In many families, there are often unspoken dynamics where one child is seemingly favored over the other. While this favoritism might not always be intentional, it can create significant emotional struggles, especially when one child feels invisible and disregarded. This is the reality that Sarah, a 38-year-old woman, faced throughout her life. Her story, filled with emotional neglect and favoritism, is a painful but empowering journey that showcases the strength and resilience required to break free from toxic family relationships. It is a tale of how a person can transform their pain into power and, ultimately, regain control over their own life, even when the world around them seems determined to keep them down. A childhood marked by neglect. Sarah's early childhood was typical in many ways. Her parents were present in her life, but not in the nurturing, affectionate way one might hope for. They were emotionally distant and uninvolved in her accomplishments, preferring to focus on other aspects of their lives. Sarah's mother, Irene, helped her with homework, and her father, Banks, would occasionally take her fishing, but their emotional investment in her life was minimal. However, things changed drastically when Sarah was 8 years old. Her younger sister, Rachel, was born prematurely and became the focus of the family's attention. From the moment Rachel arrived, Sarah's life was altered. Rachel, who required special medical attention and constant care, became the center of the family's world. Sarah, once an only child and the recipient of whatever attention her parents could offer, was suddenly relegated to the background. The dynamic shifted. Their home was transformed into a sterile, almost obsessive environment, as Irene cleaned and sanitized every inch of the house to protect Rachel from germs. Even the slightest signs of illness in Sarah would lead to her being sent away to her grandmother's or aunt's house. The message was clear. Sarah's health was a threat to Rachel's well-being, and she was not to be a part of the household's daily life unless she was perfectly healthy. Sarah tried her best to gain attention in healthier ways. She worked hard in school, earning all A's and even winning first place in a science fair with a project on renewable energy. But her achievements were met with indifference from her parents. They were too busy attending to Rachel's doctor's appointments and special needs. As Sarah entered adolescence, she continued to excel academically, but felt more and more invisible. No matter what she did, it was never enough to earn her parents' admiration. This sense of invisibility was further amplified by Rachel's increasing use of her medical condition as a way to manipulate the family's attention. By the time Rachel was 7 years old, her health problems had largely resolved, but she learned how to use her past as leverage to keep the focus on her. The growing divide. As Sarah navigated her teenage years, the emotional neglect from her family deepened. Sarah's growing independence was dismissed as self-sufficiency, and her academic accomplishments were seen as insignificant compared to Rachel's minor struggles. When Sarah scored a perfect 1,600 on her SATs, she was eager to share the news with her parents, but they were too focused on Rachel's needs to give her the recognition she deserved. It was yet another sign that no matter what Sarah did, it would never be enough to earn their approval. Even when Sarah applied to college on her own, writing her essays and handling all the paperwork herself, her parents didn't offer any support or encouragement. Instead, their focus shifted entirely to Rachel and her high school extracurricular activities. Throughout high school, Sarah developed a relentless work ethic. She joined various clubs, became president of the National Honor Society, and earned a part-time job at a local diner. Meanwhile, Rachel, whose achievements were far less significant, was celebrated by their parents for things as trivial as making toast. Sarah poured all her energy into her future, determined to break free from the stifling expectations placed on her. She realized that the only person who would champion her success was herself, so she became her own cheerleader, determined to succeed despite the lack of support from her family. A breakthrough in college. When Sarah was accepted to the University of Michigan with a full scholarship, it was a victory not just for her academically, but emotionally as well. She was finally going to escape the shadow of Rachel and her parents' toxic favoritism. But her family's response was not one of celebration. While Sarah's achievement should have been cause for excitement, her parents' primary concern was Rachel's well-being and how they would manage her cheerleading competitions. Even when Sarah told her parents that she was going to Michigan, they barely acknowledged it, instead lamenting that Rachel would be left behind. Their focus on Rachel's needs continued to overshadow Sarah's achievements, but Sarah's determination was unwavering. Her time at college marked a period of independence and growth. Sarah worked tirelessly, juggling her studies with jobs to support herself. She even began working at an auction house, where her skills in antique jewelry authentication flourished. The time Sarah spent organizing her grandmother's vintage jewelry collection, as a child laid the foundation for her career in antique authentication. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a passion that turned into a profession, building a successful career. After graduating from college, Sarah's career in jewelry authentication began to take off. At first, she worked at an auction house, cataloging estate sales and verifying antique items. It wasn't glamorous work, but Sarah excelled at it. Her ability to identify valuable items that others overlooked became her signature skill. One day, while working on the Kingston estate, she discovered an Art Deco brooch that had been mistakenly identified as costume jewelry. Her meticulous research revealed that the brooch was a valuable, authentic piece, selling for $47,000 at auction. This discovery marked a turning point in Sarah's career, as it opened doors to bigger opportunities. Sarah's success in the jewelry industry grew quickly. She started her own authentication business, initially working out of a small office that she rented above a Chinese restaurant. Despite the humble beginnings, her business quickly gained a reputation for accuracy and attention to detail. Sarah's ability to spot rare and valuable items garnered the attention of private collectors and estate lawyers. As her business expanded, so did her confidence. She was no longer the invisible daughter, overlooked by her family. Sarah had finally found her voice and a way to break free from the emotional chains that had bound her for so long. Family betrayal and the ultimate revelation. Despite her growing success, Sarah continued to keep her business and financial achievements a secret from her family. They still believed she worked in an antique shop, unaware that she was running a multi-million-dollar business. But as Sarah's success became more undeniable, the pressure to keep the truth hidden grew. It wasn't until Thanksgiving, during a family dinner, that the truth came crashing down. Sarah, tired of pretending, had arranged to have the Thanksgiving meal catered. When Rachel discovered Sarah's wealth by looking at her laptop, the family's reaction was anything but supportive. Instead of congratulating her on her success, they demanded that Sarah share her wealth with them. Rachel, who had always been the center of attention, sobbed uncontrollably, claiming that she was entitled to Sarah's success. Their parents, too, joined in, accusing Sarah of being selfish and ungrateful. The years of emotional neglect and favoritism came rushing to the surface, and Sarah, finally able to stand up for herself, confronted them. She reminded her parents that she had been invisible for most of her life, and that they had never celebrated her accomplishments. Sarah pointed out how they had favored Rachel, even at the cost of Sarah's emotional well-being. She finally let them know that their demands for money would no longer be met. For the first time, Sarah asserted her independence and made it clear that she would no longer support a family that had never supported her in return. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed the Thanksgiving confrontation, Sarah cut ties with her family. She canceled the monthly financial transfers she had been making to her parents and stopped answering their calls. The harassment from her family continued, but Sarah stood her ground. She had built a life for herself, one that was independent, successful, and free from the toxic dynamics of her past. She realized that her self-worth was not tied to her family's approval, and she no longer had to prove herself to them. Through this painful but empowering journey, Sarah found the strength to live authentically. She continued to grow her business, and it flourished even more after she distanced herself from the toxic relationships that had held her back for so long. The lessons Sarah learned throughout her life about self-reliance, resilience, and the power of standing up for herself allowed her to create a future that was truly her own. One of the most powerful lessons from Sarah's story is the importance of self-worth and resilience, especially in the face of adversity. Throughout her life, Sarah was overlooked, belittled, and dismissed by her family, who favored her sister and made her feel invisible. Yet, despite the emotional neglect, Sarah found the strength to build her own path to success. Her journey teaches us that true fulfillment comes from within, not from seeking validation from others, especially from those who may never truly see our worth. It's crucial to recognize that our value is not defined by the approval or expectations of others, but by our own actions and choices. As we age, it's easy to fall into patterns of self-doubt or feel overlooked by a changing world, but it's never too late to assert our worth, to create a life we're proud of, and to embrace the freedom that comes with independence. Life may have its struggles, but just like Sarah, we can choose to rise above them, build meaningful connections, and pursue happiness on our own terms. The key is to believe in ourselves, cherish our experiences, and remember that we are never too old to make a difference in our own lives. Thank you so much for watching. We hope today's Reddit stories gave you a glimpse into the lives of others and sparked some reflection. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Silent Wars so you won't miss any of our future stories. Your support means a lot to us, and we can't wait to bring you more exciting content.